You are here to talk about 5 cyber insurance requirements that MSPs need to know. We got a really fun panel today. I've got with me Wes Spencer, VP Channel Chief from FifthWall Solutions. Hey, Wes.
What's going on?
It's a good Thursday, my friend, and
Yes.
CEO and co-founder of Phin Security, Connor Swalm. Hey, Connor.
Hey, Jeremy. Good to see you.
Hey, we finally made it happen, man.
We did. Took a few false starts, but we got it to happen for sure.
We are here. Well, this is, of course, insurance has been a hot topic for like this whole year and going back a little farther than that. But this is kind of your world now, Wes, right? This is where you live. So cyber insurance is changing. Talk to us about it a little bit.
Yeah. When I went over to FifthWall, I was like, let me stick my toes in the insurance waters a little bit. And they're like, yeah, that's great. You just stand right there. And then they went behind me and they pushed me in. So like, that's kind of my life right now. But yeah, I don't think I'm going to say anything that you don't already know. I'm just going to give you some measurable data behind it. So from 2020 to 2021, we saw premiums go from about 1.2 billion all the way up to 3 billion. In other words, we're seeing the cost of insurance that's passed to you has doubled. We know that it's doubled because it was like Oprah up in here for the longest time. All of these insurers were just chucking insurance to everybody. It's like, Jeremy, do you have a real name? Do you have a business name? And can you fog a mirror? You get insurance, my friend. This is the easy. It's like stealing candy from babies around here. And then what we saw is
I started seeing that so long ago. So before I met you guys in the MSP world, I was doing 5 years at Verizon on the wireline side. And we actually had Verizon, huge DFIR company, or at least they have a piece of that. And they sold cyber incident response retainers. And it was a good business back in the day. Enterprise customers would pay $150,000, $200,000 a year just to be on the list so they could be at the front of the line if there was a breach.
Crazy.
And immediately, overnight, one year, that just vanished. It was around 2016 when Lloyd's of London started writing cyber insurance policies, and I had some of my clients send it over to me. And to your exact point, there was nothing. It was just like, do you have a DUNS number? Okay, you get a policy.
Yep.
There was no qualification whatsoever. And I knew some change was afoot.
Yep. And what's funny too is that cyber insurance carriers are not very smart when it comes to cybersecurity. Like they're not and part of it is like they have a lot of other lines of coverage that they're actually much more concerned about, right? Like fire and hazard and like E&O and all these other kinds of things. Life. It's like, so they misinterpreted how important it was. And they also never understood what good looks like. And they're still knee-jerking their way into what good is. And that's what we're going to talk about today, right? That last thing you have there, standardization is coming. It's absolutely coming. It's like winter, it's coming, but it's going to be really, really tumultuous until we finally get to like a good progress. And isn't it crazy? Because we have security frameworks and we've been doing this stuff for a long time, but still the carriers that are the ones that pay out are the ones that are really taking their time in figuring out what it's going to look like. So yeah, there's where we're at today.
I don't think we should glaze over the fact that if winter is coming, Wes just compared himself to Jon Snow. So I just like to, he's the one at the forefront then telling everyone it's coming. So
I forget how it ended.
Better John than Rob.
Yeah, better John than Rob. John did okay. It's good to be John for your case, Wes.
And a little tip here on the top of it. If you have clients who do have cyber insurance, and you are somewhere in the middle of that renewal period, and Wes, I might have borrowed this from you from a previous thing we did, I'm not sure. Ask earlier than you normally would for that application, because last year maybe it was 1 page or 2 pages. This year maybe it's 8 or 9, and maybe there are new things on it that you didn't have to do last year, and you don't want to be scrambling within days of the renewal, which is the normal kind of process, right? As they wait around and then they flip it over the fence to you and say, hey, fill this out for me. Yep. And don't put yourself in that situation. Go ahead and start asking those customers earlier than you would, a few months ahead of time. Hey, can you reach out to your broker and can you give me a copy of the new renewal application? Because the chances are it's going to be different. There's going to be more on it. And you want to be ahead of that to make sure you have the things in place so you can answer those questions in the way that they're going to want you to be answering them.
I've had that happen twice now, very recently, of clients get denied on their ransomware application piece, like on the ancillary stuff. and I jump on with them and they're not happy that they failed. And I'm like, well, A, don't shoot the messenger, right? It's the carrier, but I can help you get through this. And they're like, well, we didn't change anything from last year to this. I'm like, you might not have changed, but they changed. So yeah, get in front 60 days ahead of time. That'll do you a lot of good.
And now, without further ado, let's talk about some of the requirements. So there are a lot of them, and there's a lot of carriers. There's a lot of variation. So we're not saying that this is anybody's specific stack of requirements, but these are probably the most frequently seen and the ones that you are very likely to see. And MFA at this point in time is always going to be on that list. I was at Duo a couple companies ago, right? And we started seeing this 2015, 2016, insurers started just asking the question. And at that point in time, the question was like, do you MFA? It wasn't even properly framed. They didn't know where it should be. Somebody told them, they heard at a concert or something that they needed MFA. And so they started asking, do you MFA? And then you guys could say, yes, we MFA, like one account. And so we're moving on. That has turned into a process of, you need MFA everywhere, or like specifically listing out where it is, or I mean, Wes, to what lengths are they going to saying where this MFA needs to be, and are they specifying what types now?
Yeah, so I'll brag on good ones and I'll leave bad ones unnamed. Good ones like Beasley. Beasley has one of the better applications. It's just very comprehensive and well written. Doesn't mean it's perfect. It's not. But they're actually pretty good. When they get into MFA, they start asking questions like, do you have MFA? Yes or no? Do you have it rolled out to all users, including IT people, including executives? They really ask a lot of comprehensive questions, but you get some carriers that do ask some bizarre things like, do you have MFA rolled out on like your firewalls and your switches? And a lot of people are like, for my vendor, that does not exist. There is no such thing for that. And so it's not that I don't want to do it. It's that you're asking a question that's infeasible for me. And so keep in mind, when
there's always radius.
Well, there's, yeah, right. Yeah. And I guess you can get creative on what multi-factor actually means, right? And so here's my thinking on this. A couple things. You've got to roll it out everywhere, period, right? Like if you have resistance from your CEO, it's got to be corrected. You have to have it that way. Everyone knows of the Travelers lawsuit that came back. They're finally have drawn a line in the sand. If you haven't heard about it, we can get you a link to it. But Travelers is going after one of their insureds because in the forensic aftermath, they learned that MFA, which was indicated in the questionnaire that it was on and operational, was actually not. And that was part of the source of the breach, or at least a piece of it. And so they're coming back from that. And jury's out, literally, pun intended, on if they're going to win that lawsuit or not. I actually have a hunch they won't. And the reason I have a hunch they won't is not because it wasn't true, but because there wasn't precedent for all of this yet. And there's probably going to be some added clarity into the policies around like clawbacks and things like that. But even regardless, this world is now changing. And then the second thing I want to throw out there is when it comes to MFA, if there are areas where it is not possible, so let's say you're healthcare and you got some ancient system that's critical to what you do and you can't deploy MFA on it, disclose it. You can add an extra addendum at the end of your policy, at your questionnaire, and disclose the things where MFA is not possible. And the reason that is insanely valuable is now you have a paper trail. And when they choose to bind with you and they bound with the disclosure that you gave them of where it's not available, that is going to usually is going to save your tail should a breach happen. And that's included. So that's really what you want to think about with MFA, Jeremy.
What's not included there though, it's always layer 8, right? Users always end up being a part of some problems that we're going to have. And how, like Microsoft, if you're using Microsoft for MFA, they don't have a specific alert that says, hey, this user bypassed MFA. And I know that we have things like that. There are other vendors out there that will alert you to things like that. That's one of my MSP's like favorite things, is that after 10 MFA bypasses, we'll send an alert saying, hey, go talk to this person because they're not doing what you think they're doing. And other ways to so continuous enforcement, like I think that's probably some of where the future side of this is going, not to like make us all tangent off on that, but because I know you're passionate about this as well. But
let's talk. I don't mean to hog the whole conversation because I want to hear what Connor thinks, but one thing, I said this the other day and I didn't get my hand slapped for it, so I'm going to say it again. Insurance is so broken right now, guys. Let me give you an example of this. One of the things that many people don't know is when you fill out the questionnaire, that is your indication of the point in time when you're binding your insurance. So in other words, here's my questionnaire. I am certifying that the things I've checked, yes and no, are accurate at this point in time. Bam, go send. And it must be true. Those things like MFA, like the traveler's lawsuit, it's happening because it wasn't in place when they said it was. Here's what's crazy to me though, Jeremy. Once the insurance binds with you, you could then actually disable all of those controls, and they would still, by regulation, have to pay out an incident because the way the language is written, it's at the time of binding. Isn't that stupid? So like I could have MFA in place, then turn it off, or it goes off because I messed up or I turned it off, whatever. And insurance is wising up to this. So you're going to see a continuous monitoring approach where they're going to say it's at the time of binding for the application, but then we have the right to monitor some form of this throughout the time of the policy. They have to go that direction because there's too many breaches that are happening when things go out of band.
I didn't know that. Yeah, thank you. That's a great
People
nugget.
don't talk about this. It's a huge issue.
We discussed a little bit about that on a webinar. Wes and I were on a few days back. Yeah. And then we went even so far as you mentioned, like not only like continuous, I wouldn't say monitoring, but verifying that the MFA is in place, not just at a point in time, but on a regular basis. But even going further and saying certain types of MFA doesn't matter if you have them enabled because they're not phishing resistant. And so it's, what happened with, I don't think it was Uber, but the recent breach that was MFA fatigue related, that's often attached to SMS related MFA, which there's, a gap there between that and app-based or FIDO2-based MFA. So I don't know. I'm not an insurance expert.
In the Uber one, I think there was a portion of it that was push phishing.
Yeah. So I don't know if I could see if there's going to be continuous monitoring as well, there's probably also going to be a little bit of, okay, you need to do it this way then too.
All right. Segregated backups. This is something that, our industry has been not worried about, but has been doing for quite some time and has been getting better at since the days were removed from tape to things like Datto. So this isn't anything new, but is there anything new about the requirements that they are specifying around segregated backups?
Good question. Usually a lot of the backup kinds of stuff, when I go and look at a typical, and I'm just bringing one up real quick, just because I want to kind of talk as I look at it. They're really asking, a series of questions. Like, they want to ask a few things, right? Is it corporate backup? Does it have MFA? Is it immutable? So most of you know what immutable means. That means once that backup has been provisioned, I can't go and delete it or edit it or something like that according to the retention period. They're also getting smart enough to ask some questions around, like, is it real backup or is it just syncing? Like you can't for good carriers like a Beasley, you can't go in there and say, oh, I've got Dropbox, so I've got backup. Nope. They actually distinguish between the two. So they're going to want to know those kinds of things because you're seeing some companies like, oh yeah, we do backups. You just save something to the S drive and it syncs out to like OneDrive. So we're good. Right. And then they ask things like, do you encrypt your backups? Are they stored off site? Do you actually test the recovery? So you're getting a lot of like ancillary metadata sorts of questions coming around backups. Now, here's the thing. This is the kicker. A lot of times these extra questions they're asking are not go, no, go decisions, right? So you might say yes to a lot of these, but they say, do you perform test restoration? You say no. You still may have a carrier decide to bind with you. But just understand the reason they're asking these extra questions, even though they don't indicate pass fail, it's still data gathering. And they're going to look in the history of breach aftermath to say, well, what's the commonalities here that we need to start making these things happen? So they're asking more questions about backups, but we haven't seen a huge focus yet other than it needs to be separated. It like segregated, needs to be immutable, and it needs to be different than like the OneDrives of the world. That's kind of where they're at right now.
So what I'm hearing is tell the truth and you will still, there's still a good chance you'll have someone to bind with you, even if you don't have what you perceive to be the right answer to every single question. But it's more important to answer technically correctly about that point in time than it is to have all the perceived right answers.
Yep. Yep. The rule of thumb, it's just like school, never lie, clarify where you need. And then if you get some kind of rejection, you can come back and, well, one of the problems that carriers have is they don't ever give you reasons why. It's not like a test where you get the test back and they're like, well, you failed because you missed question 14. They just test, you got it, you didn't. This is where, just to get a little sales pitchy with you, that's what we do all day long. At Fifth, we actually have direct carrier access. Most brokers you talk to, they have to go through a middleman like us. So when we're talking, we can go right to the carrier and say, yo, why did they fail? They mentioned that they had, let's use Blumira for a minute. Like, they asked if you had SIEM and like a managed SOC, and they said, yes, we have Blumira. And the big nasty, XYZ carrier is like, well, we don't know Blumira. We only know Splunk. Well, we'll go in and handle that situation. So it's always good to be transparent and be clear and clarify as much as you can. And then we can come in and have additional conversations to understand what went awry, if something went awry. And this goes back to getting in front of it 60 days in advance, because we can go course correct and get things into the right direction. So yeah.
It's improv rules. Yes. And always clarify around, provide maybe a little bit more information, or no, and if the case may be, but if you can't answer the specific question the way you want to, but you are doing something, you can still add clarification that will be helpful for that process. This one, we kind of bundled these two together, can put them under the umbrella of endpoint security. This has been a change because there's been an evolution of the past couple of years from just antivirus to next gen antivirus, whatever that specifically means, to now EDR, endpoint detection and response. And Connor, you want to take a stab at trying to parse out between the two?
So this exact question that you just asked is a question that I asked Wes on our last webinar, is what the heck's the difference? And because I remember watching Wes rant like 4 months ago on acronym bloat. It's like, there's EDR, there's MDR, there's...
Don't get me started on XDR.
XDR, now there's
XDR.
ADR.
Don't do
ADR. It. Then I was talking with Kyle Spooner. He's coming out with Spooner DR. So maybe we'll see that one day as well.
Kyle
and then,
DR.
Yeah, Kyle DR. Yeah. And then there's next gen AV. So this was the most concise, and I was actually going to ask Wes if you didn't bring it up again. The most concise answer I've gotten on next gen AV is anything above just signature checking, which is like, you got your base tier of Norton antivirus. It's like, do you have something a tiny bit more than that? It's like, all right, that's probably next gen AV is like the most concise answer I've gotten. But I'm curious to hear Wes's thought. Why are these even separated in carriers' minds?
Because they're not smart. They get sold a hill of beans a lot. And so they're constantly out there talking to the vendor ecosystems, and sometimes they listen to the marketing too much as well.
Yeah.
And, we all look, I understand, like, taking an algorithmic approach to security has benefits, right? It's not going to solve security, but it has benefits.
Right.
And so they hear that too. And so they sort of hear the next gen AV and like, oh yeah, we definitely want to make sure everyone has that, because we do see a measurable difference, differentiator between that and just hash checking. We would all agree with that at just a simple level. It's not going to stop everything, and it's certainly not going to see everything, but it certainly will help. And so that's kind of where they come from on this. But I will tell you, there is a shift, and that shift towards EDR is both positive and it's becoming more and more strong. So you'll see these questions now where, again, I'm just going to keep using Beasley because they're one of my favorites. They actually ask a whole slew and series of questions around this kind of stuff. So the last questions like, do you have enterprise protection, EPP? So that would be like EV, that'd be like your AV. But then they ask, do you have EDR? Do you have SOC? Do you have NDR? Do you have SIEM? They actually ask line items for each of those. And I think that's strong and positive, because you don't have to have an answer for all of them. And you might have an answer like maybe Blumira does. It does the SOC, it does the SIEM, it does the NDR, right? That's great. So we're starting to see a shift towards that. But of all the things that I think they're really starting to focus on, it's really EDR is one of the base things they want to see there. And here's why. They notice in terms of like detecting early signs of activity before ransomware can happen, EDR plays a role. And so we actually had a client we dealt with recently that did not have EDR in place. And so they were going through their application. I won't say the name of the carrier. And the carrier came back and they said, look, they want $1 million in aggregate limits. We're willing to give that, but we have a sublimit for ransomware at 250K. And we're not going to go above it unless they put EDR in. And so you'll see them sort of, that's your way of knowing from the carrier perspective, we're bearing too much risk to go all the way up to $1 million or $2 million if you don't have the right controls in place.
Yeah, everyone loves those support tickets. For, hey, my computer mouse is moving without me doing anything. What's going on?
Gotta be fine. Just restart.
I mean, and so I was at Hunters for a couple of years, right? And we talked, I had to talk about this a lot because then it's like, where does that play in? But, and I'll give that part of my spiel and see how you guys feel about that. But almost every endpoint protection company has an AV, which now might just be the next gen AV, and then an EDR, and then a managed EDR. And so almost all of them have each one of those that they'll bump you up a couple bucks at each layer. A lot of the reason that the EDR is helpful in raising these types of early indicators is because it gets more telemetry. But also a lot of them, if you don't have anybody looking at any of the telemetry or looking at any of the alerts, it's really not helpful. It might be helpful in that some of them keep those logs around for a little longer, so you can like go backwards in history and see what's going on. But there is an argument to be made that if you're not using the EDR components of just like a big brand name EDR, find something that has a more managed component to it, and then just use like that AV, and you'll end up probably spending less and you'll have a better security standpoint. Because if you're not sending those EDR logs and alerts anywhere, and it's just gathering the telemetry, the majority of the benefit you're getting is still that the next gen AV component that blocks stuff, and then you're gathering stuff you're not actually using. So make sure that you're working with somebody, or you're using those for good. Otherwise, you're just kind of throwing some money down the toilet. Unless you were required to do so. Yeah, I'd love to hear your guys' feedback.
One thing that comes to my brain, I mean, that's right on the money. And one thing that comes to my brain with that statement there is when we engage with IR. So FifthWall has a number of like partners that we work with on the IR side of the house. 100% of them, day one of the breach, once they're called into action and everything's signed and they're good to come in and they got force and scope, first thing they deploy is EDR. And it's different ones, right? But it's the first thing that they deploy. And then the reason that that's so important is because in the middle of a breach, the EDR is the one thing that can tell you what's happening on the endpoint. And the other problem, though, is a lot of people don't have a SIEM in place. And so they don't have the ability many times to go back in history to see what actually happened, when it happened, how it happened. They don't have that evidential data because a lot of people just don't have the right logging data to see it. And so that's why the two go hand in hand. EDR to tell you what's happening right now on the endpoint, and SIEM to tell you this, when it happened, how it happened, why it happened, what the EDR said, plus all the log data that said, plus cloud data and all the other ancillary stuff. And that's what makes incidents so messy. But that's how you know EDR is really critically important, is because it's the first tool that they go and plug in and get insights into. So I just wanted to throw that out there, because that's what we see missing oftentimes, is if there's EDR in place, no one's looking at it. And if no one's looking at it, we're certainly not sending it to a SIEM, which just really muddies the incident and really drives costs through the roof.
Yeah.
It also doesn't hurt that most EDRs give it to IR companies for free, but that's beside the point.
Or the EDR companies are now doing IR themselves.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
They've got their own arm for it. Yeah, it's ATM for them.
It feels like a conflict of interest, but I'm not going to be the one to legally define that term.
Connor, here we are, man.
Yeah, we're at security awareness training. My special. The second my camera starts to freak out, and there we go.
There we go.
You want me to speak on this?
Yeah, go for it, bud.
So I'll do this. A lot of MSPs have been reaching out to me recently because this is now required as a line item in their cyber insurance policies, or when their client goes to renew, their client's now bringing up the conversation. If you don't have something in place that you can give them or manage for them, it just becomes a more difficult conversation. So there are really two types of security awareness training. You can do the in-person, like a couple hours at a time, sure, that checks the box in this case, or you can do computer-based, like online training, which is what we offer at Phin. If you're looking for something that's not only like actually checking the box, but effective, computer-based is way more, is the better way to go. It's not only more efficient in terms of employees' time for your, like not using it for your clients, but also information retention and understanding. And really the goal of security awareness training is to change behavior, and that change of behavior creates a reduction in risk. So try to do everything you can to provide the most effective kind of training that's actually going to do that in your employees. It's a hard thing to do though. Every human's different. And security awareness traditionally took an enormous amount of time to do correctly. So I think we're at the start of a growth in this, in my specific industry right here, that we're going to see over the next decade or so.
And I've been looking at a lot of these applications lately, and something that I noticed both on the EDR front and on this is the follow-up question around, so do you have EDR? What percentage of endpoints do you have EDR on?
Yeah.
Do you have security training program? What percentage of your employees do you actually have that go through that? And so those follow-ups, they're good. Like that.
Yeah.
Those questions were missing before, because yes, I have EDR. I have EDR on one server. Like that's not really going to cut it.
And this gets into what we were talking about before. That's iteration 1. Iteration 2 is, and don't shoot the messenger. This is where it's going. You're going to have to certify that stuff. So you're either going to have to do some kind of like uploads and like monthly certification, or you're going to have to pop in some API creds that give them the ability to come in and look at some of that. It's the only way that this is the future. You may not like it, but this is where it's going. So they don't need insights into everything. They just need to know, you said EDR is rolled out everywhere. I want to see that it's rolled out everywhere. The EDR through an alert. I don't need to know the alert. I just need to know there was an alert. I need to know it was remediated and handled. That's where insurance is going.
Yeah.
Well, and it's not new, right? There's the snapshot plug-in into the car. I have I have an app from my insurance provider on my phone that connects Bluetooth to my car when I get in and drive. So I can try and keep that safe driver discount. I don't particularly like it because then my wife knows if I ever go over 80 miles an hour, but some things you got to do for love. So yes, this is not a new idea. It is just taking a tried and true method that they've used and applying it to another sector of their business.
Nailed it.
Yeah. I actually, I see a lot of people, MSPs, when they reach out to me, they're like, let's just do all their training right now, so they're compliant the week or the 2 weeks before their insurance audit, and then like, we'll be good to go. It's like, okay, sure. That does accomplish it accomplishes this checkbox right here. It doesn't necessarily accomplish way better security. And I think, I don't know that I put this here, but they'll look for the MSP focused security training. A lot of MSPs I talk to, it's like almost a full-time employee's job to do this with most current tools. So just something to look out for. The hidden cost of security awareness is what I call it.
Connor, I never shared with you this story, but I want to know what your thoughts are on it. I was speaking at a conference, this is years ago. I was still at my bank. So it was me, and it was the CISO for a very large bank, a top 10 bank. And so I'm a small CISO from a small bank, right? And we stumble into security awareness training. This is probably circa 2012, something like that. It's a long time ago, back when you were probably still like in middle school or something. I don't know. And he made this comment. He's like, I hate security awareness training. As soon as we can abandon this, we are. It does no good. It's never done any good. It's a waste of time. It's a waste of time of my resources, and there's no measurable distance. And I just looked at him. I'm like, I can't believe you just said that, because at my bank, we get a ton of value out of it. Why do you think it is that these super massives think it's such a waste of time?
I'll explain it in a quote that I just recently heard. No breath is better than bad breath. It's like basically having nothing in place is better than having the wrong thing in place or having it poorly implemented. Most security awareness that I still see today, and it's something I'm actively, outspoken about and helping our partners do really well, is this like adversarial relationship that the IT folks, whether that's external in the MSP or whether that's the internal that you're working alongside of, and the employees of the client, still exists. There's this really adversarial relationship, and that boils down to let's select the fishes to really fool these guys. And while there is a little bit of fun in that, we built a phishing simulator because we thought it was really fun to fish people and not get arrested for it. It's just not the right mentality to have. So when an employee makes a mistake, which all of us do, then they get hit with a video that they've seen 4 or 5 times already that year, because inevitably They're the person that keeps clicking on everything, and then immediately they just get upset, they get angry, they mute the video, move it to their second monitor, they play with their dog, their cats, say hi to their kids, whatever it is, and then move on with their day. And the reason I say that exact story is I went and talked to the employees at the clients about what they did, and that was their answer. Like 90% of the time was, oh yeah, I think I remember that video, I just muted it. It's like, oh, well, somebody paid for that and you got none of the value. So we need to work on something here. So that's why.
Well, and to piggyback off of that, the larger organization you are a part of, the more bland the content and the things that you can send all of the employees tends to be.
Yep.
And so it goes to a least common denominator of good when you are going to try and select something. Like if you're too afraid about whatever the case may be, but oftentimes good content might offend somebody somewhere, and the higher chances that if you're at a larger organization, they're going to stay away from anything that might end up on HR's doorstep, or that even has an HR department. Right.
Yeah.
Once you,
it's and we talked in a little bit ago about what does the future of this look like, and you mentioned it right here. It's everybody gets this same level of training. That is a disservice to everybody. Everyone needs different training and different things. Everyone's at a different level of their own understanding and capability. I think what we're going to see in the future is a change. It's how are you identifying the unique vulnerability that a certain employee or a certain group of your employees might have as opposed to this other group? That's what I think is going to happen.
And there's precedent for that with the CIS controls looking at, I think that's in IG3, right? But looking at when you get to training, they want role-based training.
Role-based.
So, yep.
Yeah,
I can't tell you how many times and duo days I had. I was helping MSPs roll out MFA, and they're like, "Okay, everyone gets it except for the C levels."
Actually, Jeremy, I hear that day in and day out. I still get support tickets that I see because I see all the support coming in. And this is what I say: our phishing training is done in such a way that if you don't fail, you won't get it. So it's like, you know what? Mr. or Mrs. CEO, you don't need training. We agree. You're not going to get it if you don't fail. And then immediately the next week when they fail, they get the training. What is this? It's like, oh, well, you just failed. So here we are at the training that is here to help you recognize what went wrong and how you can fix it. So it's just funny. Immediately when you say that, if you don't fail, you're not going to get it. They're like, oh, okay, I'm good then. And then inevitably it happened. We're all human. And there was a report that came out. IT people are just as susceptible to social engineering as a normal individual who's not technical, if not more so in certain cases. So it's a human thing.
Who else of the company's job is it to help people with technical things? So very susceptible. We are all the weakest link. It's always going to be layer 8. I put this as an up and comer because we're starting to see this. If you look at all the controls across all the various compliance regimes, they've all said for quite some time, log retention and monitoring. And what that points to, unless you're just doing a syslog server that doesn't actually help on the prevention and detection and response side at all, it just keeps logs. It's pointing to a SIEM. You're starting to see this trickle in. I'm not sure how many carriers at the moment are actually, a lot of them have the checklists that you were saying. I think Beasley is one of them that asks, do you have a SIEM? It does with the EDR and with all the rest of the things we mentioned. But a lot of them will say something like, do you have log retention that is greater than X days? And sometimes it's 90, sometimes they recommend 1 year. But what are you seeing across the landscape on this side of things, Wes?
Yeah, that's a great question. So a few things. One, before I answer that question, I do a podcast with Phyllis Lee. She's the director for the CIS controls. Love Phyllis. She's a brilliant person. And when we got into control, it's 6, I think, for logs. I think I could be wrong. We're working off memory. I asked her that question on the podcast. I'm like, why does it seem like CIS is a little weak here? Because in IG1, it's just like, we just enable logs. And it's kind of like, well, what does that, Phyllis, what does that really do? And she's like, no, we agree. She's like, I personally agree with you. She said, we're really looking at really shifting more from IG2 into IG1. If you don't know the difference, IG1 implementation group 1, it's sort of like the basic beginnings of hygiene. It's not your endpoint, it's your starting point. And I just, I was kind of like, what's the point of enabling logs if you're not going to at least, like you said, Jeremy, at least send it to a syslog server to be able to capture it, right? And so she agrees. So expect changes there around best practice of like pulling this downward some. Yeah, you're going to take a look at this live. I like this. And you're going to test me to see.
I already know what
There it is. It's 8. It's 8. Yeah.
I already know what 14 is.
Yeah. So there it is. 8.2 is just collecting them, right? Like that's the beginnings, but actually 8.1 is enabling them and then 8.2 is collecting them. So we really need to shift 8.2 downward into IG1. But yeah, there you have it. And so that's something that I think we need to see happen. So now to answer your question, when it comes to carriers, they are distinguishing and they understand, what like SIEM is. And they're starting to figure out that like SIEM without someone looking over it is really only valuable in the IR process, which is measurably important to insurance. I'm going to read a quote from Chris Lair in just a second that really indicates that. But yeah, you still don't see enough maturity yet around all of this of like how important it is. So now, can I read Chris's quote? Is that spoiling anything, Jeremy? I know it's going to go into your, okay. So this is such a good quote. This, for those of you that don't know Chris Lair, he's a personal friend of mine and he runs incident response for Solace, which is under CFC Insurance. I just want to read this quote to you because this is right from a horse's mouth, so to speak. He says, the need to capture events and logs from critical systems have been around for nearly 20 years. I'm amazed at how many companies do not take this seriously. Capturing logs is only part of the problem. Going back to what we just said. You also must be able to make sense of these logs and take action upon events in those logs. From an incident response perspective, it is the unfortunate truth that the majority of cases we work with have no logging available. If they had logging in place, we likely would have been able to make sense out of the situation very quickly. Had they had login and monitoring in place, the attack would have probably been less impactful. The need for a SIEM that is modern and has the ability to analyze events, correlate events, leverage other forms of data such as threat intel is so important, and every company, regardless of size, should be implementing it. Bam, period. End of quote. There you go. That's what we need.
And the being able to make sense of them piece, that speaking to, I need to parse these things out into a searchable database. And then I need to be able to apply detections on these. And these are things that for generations, SIEM had to be used inside of a SOC. It had to be run by security analysts because it was just the tool. It wasn't the configuration of the tool. And it is only now through things like what you helped build over at Perch and what Blumira is doing that basically turns SIEM into an IT tool that MSPs can use, because we do all of the security stuff and all the parsing behind the scenes that allows this to be a tool that's usable at the SMB space, but it accomplishes those goals. We write all the parsers, so it's all in a database that you or whoever you give access to can use for research purposes. We apply those detections. And one of the reasons I came over here, because when I did a lot of research while at Huntress and a lot of kind of the public speaking aspect of it. When you think about NIST, identify, prevent, detect, respond, recover. And I would be putting those like mapping tools to those lanes. One of the only things that can really be put in every single one of those lanes is a SIEM, and everything else really has one, maybe two. And when you have a properly configured SIEM, it will actually help. You can't protect what you cannot see. So you're getting visibility into all your things, and then you are more properly able to prevent things that you weren't able to see before. So yeah, there's a lot of use cases for having one of these things rolled out, and insurance is just now starting to wise up to that. Something I also want to mention that impacts what you're doing as well, Connor, is this isn't insurance related, but if you guys haven't heard of FTC safeguards rule for financial institutions, it is going into place December 9th. It's already enabled. It's just like all the controls have to be in place by December 9th. And I'll bring up our partner kit real quick. And
it looked like a Vim command you just tried to type into there.
Text expander, man. Text expander is the best thing ever. We have a couple downloads and I'll just look at this one. This is a Canva one. So you guys, anybody can use this, adopt this as a template, and then you guys can rebrand whatever you want. But basically, this law is saying if you are a financial institution, auto dealerships, mortgage brokers, tax preparers, financial advisors, et cetera, you have to do a number of things. It's going to be a lot of the same controls that we're talking about right now. It's have an incident response plan. You got to have somebody that's qualified individual saying you need to do that, or designated to oversee it. You need to have access controls, including MFA. MFA is on here as well. If you have service providers, those service providers need to have this applied to them as well. And you need to have an inventory of systems. You need to do a risk assessment pen test at least once a year, have a security program written down, and have that qualified person actually run through it. You need to report that to your board. Make sure you have MFA everywhere. Encryption, everything at rest and in transit. Monitor log authorization, or monitor logs for authorized and unauthorized behavior. And look at here, employee security awareness training, yet another, like all of these things are pointing you in the same direction, because we're starting to really see what good looks like. And yes, I will drop the partner kit in the chat, Hannah, and it's right there in different formats.
You got to control F that curricula or know before and add some Phin on there.
Where is that?
That's okay. I want to bring attention to
live. That's baller.
I want to bring attention to one specific word here. Regular. Provide your people with security awareness training and schedule regular refreshers. Right now, I have yet to see an example of this. So if somebody's going through an insurance audit or a questionnaire and there's an actual time frame mentioned, the regularity with which you do that, and even to a large extent, most of the content you train people on is up to your own interpretation, which I know that that's going to change as it becomes very clear. Like if you educated people twice as much on social engineering, forms of social engineering and phishing, would that be more effective at, getting people to recognize it when it's going on? Absolutely. If you did that on a quarterly basis as opposed to once a year, would that be more effective at creating retention? Absolutely. So I see that interpretation you can now put onto it going away at some point in the future.
Yeah. Good breath is better than no breath or bad breath.
Correct. Exactly. If you're going to institute something, might as well institute not only the thing that gets you compliant, but the thing that actually does the job. And they're not always the same.
That's kind of when I'm at the booth, I find myself saying a lot, like, you're going to be required to do it, so you might as well find something that doesn't suck.
Yeah, absolutely.
To that point, I just wanted to share with the audience that this safeguards rule is the real deal. It is the real deal. We are seeing a lot of activity on that on the FifthWall side. For example, I'm sure many in chat would probably agree that like car dealerships are notoriously stingy and a horrible client base. They have changed into some of the best clients on planet Earth, and you need to go after them. Here's why. You take Ford, for example, they see the safeguards rule. A huge element of where Ford makes their money is lending. So this applies to them. And so they're now going to all of their local dealerships who are racking in 250 million in cash. And they're coming to them saying, you will comply with the safeguards rule. And on top of that, you must have $5 million in aggregate limit coverage. So they then go to their carriers, and their carriers look at what they're doing, and it's atrocious. And so they get rejected right away. And so now the dealership who's got 20 to 50 employees is thinking through, how the heck do I do this security awareness training? How do I do this log stuff? How do I do this EDR stuff? How do I do this MFA stuff? And they don't have any of it in place. And so I'm just letting you guys know, we're working with a bunch of MSPs that are walking right into these dealerships saying, are you aware of FTC safeguards rule? Yes, you are. We've got to comply to that. Let's get in front of it. Here's what it's going to take. And so I'm just letting everyone know, we're already seeing this take off like crazy. And it's becoming really difficult for these clients to meet all of these goals, and they're panicking over it because they don't have the resources in-house. So just want to throw that out there. It's a real deal.
It's the real deal on auto dealerships, because like you said, the manufacturers have been pushing, but also the NADA has been pushing out. And a lot of that is because of the lobbying of the manufacturers. But those are the ones who are aware about it. All the other ones on that list, the tax preparers, the financial, it's the same thing. They don't have they don't have a GM or a Chrysler or a Ford pushing them to do it. They're just not aware of it yet. You guys could be that lever that makes them aware. because they are just as beholden to it as the dealerships are. It's just a fire at the dealerships because there's a little bit more awareness. But yeah,
Right.
we're seeing a lot of busyness around that as well. Yeah, go ahead.
Before we go into a couple, so we shared these are the 5 things that we're seeing sort of like insurance starting to require, which are these are the things that have teeth. But hear me say very loud and very clear, these 5 things are not all the things. And they're not even necessarily all the best things. Like they really, like there are other things that you need to be doing that are just bare minimum critical things. Like for example, I see Felicia in here, right? Felicia, I'm surprised she hadn't been saying
Felicia.
something around like network segmentation. That's a critical thing. You don't see insurance carriers ask about that because they're not that smart, but it's a critical thing to have in place, right? System hardening and baselining, network like patching and patch management, application security, and how you think going through all those kinds of things. Deploying built-in Windows tools like LAPS and other things that are like really, really helpful to securing baselining. I don't know if I mentioned that. There's a lot of things that you're pointing to right here that are super critical that insurance is not asking for yet, but they're going to start. So for sure, those are the 5 you've got to have critical, but boy, just recognize there's a lot else that goes into this.
I'm going to ask Felicia if I can bring her up to say hi.
Yeah, Pam's a great one, John. While we're waiting on her, Pam is a big deal, right? You're starting to see, well, you're not really, but you're going to start. We're seeing some applications start coming out. See, a lot of the applications in insurance are not MSP friendly, right? They don't assume a model of you who have RMM access, which is your own exploit kit running to all of your clients. They don't really operate under those things. And when they really start to figure that out even more, questions like privileged account management are going to become super important. You're going to start seeing them say, do you use individual credentials for every single domain administrator or local administrator rights that are issued and revoked upon time of use? Things like that Pam does. They're not asking a lot of questions like this yet. And yet it's super important when you talk to a lot of MSPs, they're like, yeah, we kind of share a lot of that. We keep it in a password manager, but oh boy, if someone gets access to that, poof goes the network. So you're going to start to see more of this being asked for sure.
And the reason I bring up CIS, sorry, Connor, is, and I know, Wes, you talk about this all the time. Pick a framework. CIS is very easy to digest, and it's a very good kind of step-by-step. So whatever it is, pick one, but this is a good one to start with, and just start going through, because this maps to the insurance requirements. This maps like it's normally it's ahead. So if you are following this and get to the second or third implementation group, you're gonna be future-proof for a while, because the cyber insurance carriers are always working behind the times. And some of the stuff that they're going to require and have in the past and will in the future are going to be behind the times, but where they're going is where some of this stuff already is. Sorry, Connor, you were going to say?
I was going to say, I just saw a Reddit thread on what Wes just kind of alluded to is an admin at an MSP asked for global admin of a tenant because it made triaging the support tickets easier. And they didn't know how to say it's like, that's absolutely not going to happen. I don't care how much easier it'd make the triaging. You don't. It was basically it devolved into a discussion of should we fire this person for even asking the question, kind of deal. So
I won't name names, but I've heard on good authority that there are RMM solutions out there that have like root master passwords for some of their internal employees to get access to client things, just because it's easier to troubleshoot, just for that exact reason. Scary when you think about that. So, well, didn't hear back from Felicia. Don't want to bring her up without permission, because it's going to automatically turn cameras on, and that's just weird. So we're going to wrap up here. Very quickly, Blumira does work very well with MSPs. We are free for internal use for MSPs. We cover that 1 year retention, 24/7 SecOps support with an 1 hour SLA, and we do all of the security things. So really it just turns it into follow our very good documentation to get all of the logs from all of the things out to us. And then the outcome has detailed step-by-step instructions that you can follow to remediate and then get back to your job. And it's free for you, and it's actually affordable for your end users. So again, like I just mentioned before, if you're going to have to be forced to do something, might as well work with people who don't suck. That's us. Come hang out. But I'll also pitch this over to Phin.
yeah, So we do security awareness training and phishing sim. We take all the management out of it. So when I say automated, I don't mean we're an enterprise solution that threw the words multi-tenancy into our marketing and said we have a channel program, so come use us. We're built only for MSPs. I say channel first because we have a friend that is a direct sale for an internal IT team. But other than that, just MSPs. So we've built it for your use. We have a council of MSPs we meet with every 2 weeks. And we have great folks like Wes and others who are really, really deep into the channel as advisors to kind of help us steer in the right direction.
And Wes, tell us a little bit more about FifthWall.
Yeah, for sure. So FifthWall is the largest cyber insurance distributor. So what that means is all we do is cyber. We don't touch any other lines of insurance, nothing. It's all we do. It's all we eat, breathe, live, sleep. Reed Wellock, our president, easily one of the top 5 in the world, I would say, on just what cyber insurance looks like. And so I'm just helping build the channel program and bringing MSPs into the fold, because MSPs get stuck in these conversations around, how do I help my client with this? How do I help them find the right thing? And we actually have access to, like, you name the carrier, we know them all. We work with them all, 40 plus. Most just have like 2 or 3 when you talk to like a broker. And so what that means is when we say direct access, we're talking to them directly. So we'll help you with this. 9 times out of 10, we find a policy for half the price of what they were paying the year before, which is amazing. But usually what it does is it requires the client to have better things in place. So a car dealership, just example super quickly, we had one that was paying $30,000 the year before. We found one for 15, but they had to roll out a few things that they did not have before, like MFA. They weren't doing security awareness training. That was one. So they had to put a few more things in place. And so the MSP loves it, because finally I get to be the bad guy. I get to come in and say, well, you got to do these things over here. If you do them, you can get this cheaper policy. You're going to pay more for those controls, but you're still saving more in the long run. So they're like, oh, this is a no-brainer, right? So that's what we do every day. And I'll pop in an email address. If you just want to bypass our channels and just go right to one of our insurance reps, we have dedicated account reps that work with you and your clients that are insurance agents, which is super cool. So it just makes it really easy.
And we're finally at that magic point that I've been waiting for like a decade, where the premiums in cyber insurance are going to be higher than the cost of the controls, that if you just did the right things, and then you will, like you said, save money in the long run. That's where it should be, and that's where it should stay. You should have to pay more, because for a long time, the Wild West of cyber insurance was a disincentive to good security, because then they just said, I don't have to care. I'm just going to sign this policy. They're going to bind. And if I get hit with ransomware, I'll get paid back. And then going through that type of an event, they'll never want to do that again. But I think we're getting to the place where it should have always been, where you can have financial incentives through the insurance provider, who is supposed to be the one measuring risk, right? To put the right controls in place. And that puts the MSP in the chair of the good guy, just matching solutions with a need, which is where we like to have you. So thank you guys all very much for joining me. This has been a lot of fun. And thank you guys very much for attending as well. We have more webinars. All of us are always on webinars. So check us out there in the lands. I'm sure Wes and on his LinkedIn and Connor on his LinkedIn will be announcing more things. But if not, we'll see you out in the field. I know I'll see you guys at IT Nation, if not before. But thank you all very much. Have a wonderful Thursday, and we'll see you next time. Thanks, guys.
Thanks, Jeremy.
Thanks.